Welcome to UCStrategies Executive Insights. This is Jim Burton, and I'm here with Pascal Menezes from Microsoft. But we're not here to talk about Microsoft specifically. We're here to talk about the UCI Forum, which Pascal is a member of. And so can you tell us about your role and a little bit more about UCI Forum?
Oh yeah, thanks Jim. Thanks for having me, by the way. So the UCI Forum was founded about 2010. About 32, 34 members. It changes and growing. And the goal of the UCI Forum was really to promote interoperability of the different types of vendor products. Everywhere from UC systems like what we do today at Lync to like gateways and USB devices and cameras and so on. Just get that interoperability working. So there's a number of technical groups that are working on some very challenging ideas. For example, I was chairing the IPv6 group to do SIPv6. As you know, address depletion is a big issue, so we now pretty well have a great tool set coming out to test for interoperability around SIPv6. We're also doing something on H.264 for video to get the interoperability for that. And the one specifically I'm now driving is a thing called UC SDN, software-defined networks. So I think that's really the innovative area that I'm kind of like focused on right now, as to how to make applications and network talks better together.
So one of the big questions that I have, and it's always, because you're an engineer, and please don't take this as an insult, but engineers are oftentimes solving problems that some of us don't understand exist, and sometimes you're way ahead of us and know that. So what is the problem you're trying to solve here?
That's great. I'm glad you actually asked that. Yes, you're right. We sometimes try to solve things just for the sake of it's techie and it's cool. But in this case, I think we actually are onto something. I've been doing internet networking for almost 30 years, and I think in 30 years, even from when I started, even back in BICIC and X25, when the IP and the internet networking protocols came out, nothing's really changed. And so in internet networking, we're still living 35 plus years of technology, nothing's really changed. And the fundamental problem is, what we've done is, as we walked into the internet networking world 30 plus years ago or more, we went to the packet paradigm. And what happens is applications would just shove their application packets on the wire, and it would just try to get across, and then we'd have to put TCP to retransmit. But the bottom line is that the networks, they've been evolving by getting more and more intelligence into them to try to figure out what's going on with the application. So we have these deep packet inspection technologies, all this sophistication that's happening in the network just to find out what's going on with the application. So what you have is this miscommunication, applications and network not talking to each other. And so fundamentally what you have is, since they don't talk to each other, they're like ships in the night, just doing their own thing, and then networks trying to figure out what's going on with the application, applications trying to shove their stuff to the other side, and if it doesn't work, it retransmits, and and you just, the end result is you just don't get a great end user experience. The end user suffers, like whether it be in UC, something you get, dropped audio, or the video's freezing, or even things like, for example, streaming video, on-demand video. I mean, you have huge buffers, it still sometimes can just lock up, and because the network's, stop passing packets. So these are the examples.
Well, those are good examples, and I understand there really is a problem to solve here. Now the question is, how are you going about solving that problem? Yeah,
so I think what's happened, and the reason I talked about the 30-year-old plus internet networking not changing, is the paradigm of internet networking has always been put the intelligence distributed into every router and switch, what we call network elements. Because back then we didn't have processor speeds, we didn't have memory, and so the idea is, how do you make that, how do you put that intelligence centralized, is really what software-defined network is describing, is take the control protocols that were all just decentralized and distributed, centralize them into what they call the controller. And then the controller has this intelligence to it, be able to then program these network elements on demand dynamically. And so the ability, if that's actually now coming into play, and we're seeing that in the data centers as the first implementation scenario, because it kind of, when you're moving VMs, the network has to adapt fast for that. So we learn what software-defined networks is. This is a very strong paradigm that if a centralized intelligence, centralized control plane, programming in real time these network elements with just these kind of flow rules, then if you have this central point, then why can't applications talk to this central point? I mean, in the old world of internet networking, it was very hard for an application to talk to every node. That wouldn't scale, wouldn't work.
Yeah.
But today, we actually have something very cool in the idea that we can talk to this controller, and then the controller can do the right things in the network. And the interesting thing about what we do in unified communications is our applications are long-lived flows. So unlike a web transaction where it might be just sub-second, that's not enough to program the network. Unified communication, when you do voice or video, there are minimally minutes to definitely, on average, half hour to hour, or even more. So it's a perfect kind of long-lived flow that can program exactly the requirements into the network. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and you can just see that it's going to make such a big difference in how these applications work. So if you've got an application and it is helping manage the bandwidth, it's going to have what it needs to deliver the rich experience that people are looking for.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the scenarios are just endless to think about this. When applications, end-user applications, can actually talk down to the network and give its requirements, it's very powerful. And this is not just futuristic stuff. This is actually happening, and we're seeing products ship out with this paradigm where there's a UC SDN API, and I won't talk from a certain UC vendor that's actually delivering this with partners and showing these kind of rich scenarios. And it's very powerful, very, very powerful. And the net result is you get a lower cost of operations, for TCO. You get a higher performance of the application working better. And the end users love it, because things just work flawlessly.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be easier to manage. It sounds like the cost will be down, which you mentioned. Why wouldn't they love it?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that you bring up, though, you say it's already kind of started, but where are we in the cycle? Because I know a lot of times when you get started on something, before you can really see any momentum, you've got to go through several steps. So where are we in the cycle, and when is this going to be really mainstream?
That's a great question. So like everything in technology takes time, and it's crawl, walk, run. So I would say we're in the kind of like the crawl, walk area, and we need to standardize it. So what the UCI Forum is doing is it's standardizing a set of use cases right now under the UC SDN task group, which I'm chairing. And what we're doing is we're describing these very detailed use cases with the information models and what it needs to do as a scenario. And we're working with Liaison with the Open Network Forum, Open Network Foundation, which is the SDN kind of forum. And they've created this northbound interface group that's from the controller, talking to these applications like ourselves. And I'm a vice chair on that group. And under the end user apps is my domain specific to make that work. So the nice thing is that we're standardizing this. We're in the works of standardizing it. And the UCI Forum, UC SDN task group is about to just sign off on the first use case, automating quality of service. Because quality of service is very expensive to deploy, very hard to maintain. And we've got a very great use case about to be signed off by the board, end of the month kind of thing. And then we'll bring it down the Open Network Foundation, and I will then receive it as part of that group and work with our group to actually describe that API, that northbound API.
And you have a day job too besides all of this.
Yeah, well, it's all blended.
Yeah, well, that's good. Well, it begs the question, because I've been involved in standards for a very long time, and I understand the complexity and the time it takes. But one of the most important things is getting support from all the various vendors out there. And I know you've got a good critical list of people that are part of the UCI Forum, but I got to believe that you're always looking for new people to join that can add value and help support and participate. Where are you on that? Are you looking for new vendors?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We are definitely looking for all kinds of vendors, and whether it be network vendors or UC vendors, whether it's session border controllers, gateways, routers, switches, Wi-Fi. Because at the end of the day, it's about UC systems talking, end user apps, but in this case, let's be specific, UCI Forum. The UC systems talking to these network kind of components. And if we can make that work really well with all these different use cases, very powerful for users. I just want to recap, today we're talking about automating quality of service, which is very expensive to deploy and maintain. Even if you get it right the first time, then you have to keep that consistency. And from our experience of our own deployments, for an enterprise voice UC, you need to have quality of service provision end to end.
Yeah.
And keeping that every router, every node, having the right policies at the cost, very expensive to maintain. So automating that has become our first priority. But then behind that, there's huge use cases around traffic engineering, call admission control, Wi-Fi, security for IDS, IPS, DDoS attacks, diagnostics. Oh, I mean that has got to be like, try to find what's wrong when something goes wrong. Oh, there's so many layers of deeps to figure that out, and it's so expensive. So if you can automate that root cause analysis, very powerful.
Well, one of my observations following this industry, as I have for so many years, is the companies that get engaged and get involved with helping set the standards and driving these trends, they end up being the market leaders. Those people that are sitting on the sidelines kind of waiting to have someone else do it, they're followers. So I really encourage those of you out there who are thinking about this, who might see this as important, to give consideration to joining the UCI Forum. Because it's going to add some real value to what you can do and the success you might be able to have.
Yeah, I totally agree that the more we get people involved in this, the more we drive to a standard. It benefits everybody. What we don't want is locked-in proprietary versions of this, because it fragments everybody, and at the end of the day, the end user loses.
Absolutely, and it's interesting. Again, following this industry as I have, there are a group of vendors out there who talk about being open, but it's not in their interest to be open.
No.
They're big enough vendors that if they're just closed, they can kind of control the customer. But I think the end customers, they're smart enough to know what's going on. And sometimes it's been an advantage to be with one vendor. Historically, we've seen a few of those. I mean, AT&T years ago was the classic case.
Yeah.
But as we move forward, we realize that openness is the important thing. And I think it's one of those things that we'll see the vendors who join and the vendors who don't, and we'll kind of get a message. If it's a big vendor who doesn't join, they may like that closedness as opposed to being open.
And I mean, it's absolutely spot on. And I think the call to action actually would be not only all the vendors out there that network vendors, UC vendors, to come join in, but also the end user enterprise customers to tell their vendors, that we want this. Please join and make this a standard, because we want to operate our networks much more cost effectively. The cost of the complexity and the cost is going outrageous. With the complexity continue to go up, the cost of people to go manage that and make it all work is just enormous, and it affects their bottom line.
Yeah, and if you can eliminate it, why wouldn't you?
Or at least mitigate it, reduce it, automate it. And then the agility itself, is real important. And then in the day, businesses are now relying on their applications to make their workflow happen. And so it's very important that those applications work correctly all the time and not be frustrating to use. So. Yeah.
I understand at Enterprise Connect you're having a special session to discuss exactly what we're talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. At Enterprise Connect, actually, there's a bunch of sessions in this area. At Open Network Summit, I think in the first weeks of March, there'll be a session around this, actually showing this UC SDN API working with a bunch of vendors that actually will be on stage demoing actual live products, shipping products in most cases, working with this kind of UC SDN API. Now, it's a proprietary version today, trying to get to standardized. Then right after that, we will be at Enterprise Connect doing a similar session, and then we'll have another session at Interop, a little different, more of a panel type. So I think the buzz is on, and the user interest, the user community, meaning the operators, enterprise operators, and so on, just see this as so much what they need right now to manage the deployment of a UC system.
Great. Well, we'll put links to those 3 sessions on this podcast or this webcast so that people can follow up and follow with that. It's been great. Do you have any parting comments you'd like to make?
Let's see, that's a hard one to answer here. Parting comments, I would really encourage, again, vendors to join. If we really want to make a difference, we have a paradigm change possible now. We've never had the ability of applications talking to networks. We tried it with RS3P, we tried it with a bunch of things, it never really worked. And because internetworking then was just not correct, it was distributed, you just couldn't make it work in the right way. Today, we literally have, with this software-defined network wave coming out, is for the next 5 to 10 years, that will be a retooling of internetworking, right?
Yep.
And we now have the ability to plug the application and give the requirements into the network. Says, this is a flow, this is a session, here's my requirements. And by the way, during the session, if it's having a problem, can tell the network it's having a problem. And the network can do the right things, adapt itself, correct itself, whatever, or even spit out, where the problem was diagnostic-wise if you can't fix it, so that, people can plan it correctly. So I think this automation idea, the agility idea, is powerful now. So I think the leaving statement I want to make is that we have the ability now to make a huge difference, a paradigm change, not only in internetworking fabric, but from applications talking downwards. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Pascal, thank you for your time
Thank
today.
you, Jim.
Really
Awesome.
well. Thanks.